There's China.
I see you found your glasses.
Yeah, Kathy had them.
Do y'all share?
Bring them down. Yeah.
I haven't seen too many people walk through the door yet for Bible class.
Yeah. How's John this morning?
He's doing pretty good. We're expecting company very shortly, so we probably won't be at church.
Okay.
And, excuse me?
Okay.
But yeah, he's doing pretty good. He's up getting dressed and everything. And
Is he 84 now or 85?
he's 85.
85. Okay.
Uh-huh. He'll be 86 in December.
In December, okay.
Just a few days older than you.
He's 4 years older. I'm 82.
I know.
My kids have, Jason and his wife and one of their children have all got COVID.
Oh, no.
Morning, Ralph.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
We're good. I'm upright.
That's encouraging.
Hey, Linda.
Hi.
I'm going to try to make it to service this morning.
But just be careful before you get to our parking lot to turn in, Ralph. They've remodeled right there, right off of Constitution, you know, where we turn on.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they put in some pretty hefty medians there on that entrance.
Okay.
Just be careful.
All right.
Well,
Really
good morning,
easy to-
church.
Good morning.
It is 9 of the clock. Yeah, Linnell says, how can you tell without a gong? Well, I think the gong is gone with the wind. We will be in directly Acts chapter 23, but I do have a little trailer because we didn't quite finish off chapter 22, so I want us to sort of go back into where we left off so that we can understand what's happening in chapter 23. You know, the Apostle Paul understood three cultures. He understood the Jewish culture because he was raised a Jew. He was a Pharisee of the Pharisees of the tribe of Benjamin. And, you know, he excelled in his rabbinical studies far above the rest of his classmates. And he had a great teacher by the name of Gamaliel. And he also had a trade. He was a tent maker. And his father, I believe, would have been a tent maker. And that would have been an interesting job, making tents. And certainly there's a possibility that his father may have gained freedom by his service to the Roman province of Cilicia in Tarsus as a tent maker to Rome. That's me thinking outside the box. But anyway, he understood Jewish culture, Greek culture, and Roman culture. He was educated in Tarsus. He probably had access to a lot of learned material. And that's why I think the Lord selected Paul to do what he did. And so here we are, Acts chapter 23, the first, 1 to 35. Paul comes before the Sanhedrin, which is a body of 71 individuals. And he will also stand before the governor Felix. And there is another plan to kill the Apostle Paul that is uncovered by information that his sister and her son come to tell Paul about, that there is a contract out for him. And so Paul instructs his nephew to go talk to Claudius Lucilius, the tribune, about this plot, which changes the whole ball game. So remember, Paul wanted to go to Jerusalem. He had to go. And the reason I believe he wanted to go and needed to go, almost like Jesus in Luke chapter 9, verse 51, he set his face to go to Jerusalem because that's where it would all unfold, God's plan of salvation. And Paul needed to go and stand before the same body that empowered him to go after Christians. Remember, he stood in chapter 9 holding the jackets, the cloaks, the clothes of those who were getting ready to stone Stephen. Interestingly enough, did Saul of Tarsus throw a stone? I don't think so. He let the mob do that. So, this is in chapter 22 where we left off. Just as Paul or Saul was about to be flogged or scourged, like Bill with a cat o' nine tails, it would leave an individual incapacitated and crippled sometimes. The skill was, same way that Jesus was flogged, scourged, the skill was to almost kill him, but not quite. So, the tribune ordered him to be brought into the barracks, saying that he should be examined. How do you examine somebody by flogging them? What would be the equivalent of that kind of torture. Pulling your nails out, pulling your teeth out. How about cruel and unusual punishment? Judah says, like waterboarding. The purpose is to almost kill them, but not quite, so that you can get information or truth or whatever. So he was brought into the barracks so he could be examined by scourging or flogging to find out why they were shouting at him like this. And when they had him stretched out for the whips, Paul said to the centurion, not the tribune, but the centurion, the commander of the 100 men, he says, is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned? A little bit of drama there, right? He hasn't been whipped yet. And when the centurion heard this, he went straight away to the tribune. And he said to him, what are you about to do? For this man is a Roman citizen. And he said to the tribune, he came in and he says to Paul, tell me, are you a Roman citizen? One answer, yes. The tribune answered, I bought my citizenship for a large sum of money. Meaning that at one point he was a non-citizen. He was in service, pressed into the Roman army, and then worked his way up the ranks. And Paul says, but I am a citizen by birth. Anyone who was freed and had children, their children automatically became Roman citizens, which is a higher level or status than a freed person who buys his citizenship. So, those who were about to examine him withdrew from him immediately, and the tribune also was afraid, for he realized that Paul was a Roman citizen and that he had bound him with the 2 chains, remember? So all of that's taken off. Put your shirt back on. You know, I'm sorry, sir. My mistake. You know, do you just tell a Roman tribune, I'm a Roman citizen. You can't hurt me. You can't whip me. You can't do this. You can't do that. Well, Caesar Augustus, remember Caesar Augustus? The Lex Julia, or Julian law, said it was illegal to flog a Roman. You couldn't do that. You could cut his head off, but you could not torture a Roman citizen. How did he prove it? What was on his person? You ever thought about that? Did he pull out a passport? Well, the closest thing to a passport was this little book that many Roman citizens carried. And inside, it would have the names of 7 witnesses giving their information, and it was all inscribed on 2 wax plates with a little book. leather thongs. There you go. Remember last week I told you about a diptychon? It's a Greek word. It was 7 inches high, 6 inches wide normally, with wax surfaces on the inside. Inside, it would state the date of birth, the names of 7 witnesses, the abbreviation QPFCRE, which means that these people are testifying to the fact that the person that carries this is the genuine article. So that's how I believe Paul may have strengthened his case when he said, is it lawful for you? Which indicates to me that Paul was also, in a sense, he understood and read Roman law. He had to know that. He had to know the Lex Julia. And he was smart enough to bring it up. And, by the way, here's my diptychon. Everybody ought to have a diptychon. The structure of Roman society was free people or Roman citizens, and they were split into two. There were the patricians and the plebeians. The pats and the plebs. Then you had another group called non or not citizens. They could be freedmen or liberti, or non-citizens normally were slaves. You could work, say, for a master, and the master could say, I'm going to set you free, or I'm setting you free and you can go buy Roman citizenship like the tribune did. But if you're born a Roman citizen, that puts you into another group. Free people are Roman citizens. What was it that Mark Antony said? Friends, Romans, and countrymen, basically covering all the bases, except slaves never got a look in. Paul had a stronger social status than the tribune. Paul was born a Roman citizen. He didn't have to buy it like the tribune did. So, the patricians, they all had political and civil rights. They were noble families. They were the upper crusty. And connected to the founders of Rome. Does that mean they went all the way back, Keith, to Romulus and Remus? No. It says they were in the minority of the population, but they controlled it all. It was made up of senators, magistrates, businessmen, owners of big lands, and they belonged to that class of the patricians. Power was in the patricians' hands up until the beginning of the Republic. That's when Julius Caesar shows up. Well, we all know what they did to him. When plebeians got more rights, but not more rights than the patricians. All right, here are the plebs. This is where Paul sits. Most people were plebeians. They took part in the army and paid taxes. At the beginning of the Republic, they had very limited rights. They got the same rights as patricians after 200 years of social conflict. The freedmen, they were free men that had been slaves. Their children were born Roman citizens, i.e. Paul, which would suggest to me that his mom and dad were taken to Rome or served the Roman machinery as slaves in the tent-making business. But also, when Pompey showed up, Cilicia and Tarsus became a free city. So everyone in the city who had kids or were going to have kids, those kids would become Roman citizens. The benefits. So they were known as the liberti, a Latin word, although some freedmen became very rich, influential, and most joined the plebeian class and often worked in agriculture and commerce, like tent making. In Acts 22:30, the commander wanted to find out exactly what Paul was being accused of by the Jews, so the next day he had him released and ordered the chief priests and all the members of the Sanhedrin to assemble. Now, what does that tell you about that class in the Sanhedrin? They were under the thumb of what group? Rome. When Rome says, jump, what do you say? How high? So he tells the Sanhedrin, assemble yourselves. And then he brought Paul in and had him stand before them. And as I said, note the commander ordered the Sanhedrin. It was not, please assemble. No, he commanded them. So, where they held their Sanhedrin meetings is indicated by the red arrow. It's a small, actually it looks like a very small room, but it was to accommodate 71 individuals. Why 71? Any thoughts on that? 71 and one to be the tiebreaker. 70 being, remember, Moses was having a hard time. He was about to pull all his hair out and become bald. And wasn't his father-in-law who said, why don't you delegate? And so they assembled a number of elders from amongst the people. What was the total? 70. And by the way, Moses would say, oh, I wish that all could be God's prophets. All right. 2 Corinthians 4, verses 8 through 9. I'm just putting this up to remind you of the struggles and bashings that the Apostle Paul had. Doesn't this tell you that he was really a genuine Christian? If he were not, he would have thrown off this and gone back to his old bosses. He says, we are hard pressed on every side, but we're not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. We are persecuted, but not abandoned. And we are struck down, but we're not destroyed. This is why he wanted to go to Jerusalem. Now remember, Agabus said, don't go. The brethren, the elders at Ephesus said, don't go, because you're signing your death warrant. No, he wasn't. He wanted one last chance to testify about Jesus in Jerusalem to his old bosses. In 1 Corinthians 9, 19 to 22, he says, for since I am free from all, I can make myself a slave to everyone, in order to gain even more in the kingdom. To the Jews, he understood that culture. To the Jews I became like a Jew to gain the Jews. To those under the law, the legalists, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law. To gain those under the law. To those free from the law, I became like one free from the law, though I am not free from God's law, but under the law of Christ, to gain those free from the law. And to the weak, I became weak in order to gain the weak. What does that mean, became? He stood in their shoes. He truly understood where they were. I have become all things to all people, so that by all means I might save some. Not all, but some of them. 2 Corinthians 11, 24 to 28. This is what Paul says. Now, look down at the bottom of the screen there. It says Galatians 6 and 17. This man, in all his years before he goes to Rome and he is executed by having his head cut off, he says, I bear on my body the marks of Jesus. And look at the list of things that happened to this man. 5 different times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned 3 times. Once I was stoned 3 times? I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and a whole day adrift at sea. I have traveled on many long journeys. We know of 3 and perhaps a 4th. I have faced danger from rivers and from robbers. I have faced danger from my own people, the Jews as well as from the Gentiles. He was getting it from both sides. He says, I have faced danger in the city, in the deserts, and on the seas. And I have faced danger from men who claim to be believers but are not. I have worked hard and long, enduring many sleepless nights. I have been hungry and thirsty and have often gone without food. I have shivered in the cold without enough clothing to keep me warm. And then besides all of this, I have the daily burden of my concern for all the churches. That says a lot about this guy, doesn't it? Just as he was about to be scourged, we've already read this. He says, is it lawful? So that's where we're coming in. Acts 23, verse 1, Paul's conscience is clear. Paul looking intently at the council, at the Sanhedrin. He says, brethren, brothers, I have lived my life with a perfectly good conscience before God up to this day. He's claiming that he did his best to keep God's law, offering the prescribed sacrifices, making the restitutions required under law, and as God required. Paul now stands before his old bosses. Paul says, I'm not guilty. I've got a clear conscience. Verses 1 through 5, he says, a perfectly good conscience. Verse 9 of chapter 23. The group, the people inside who are split, Sadducees to one side, Pharisees to the other, and they shout, The Pharisees shout out, "There is nothing wrong with this man. We don't see anything wrong." Of course, there were differences between Sadducees and Pharisees. Sadducees didn't believe in angels, didn't believe in a Holy Spirit, didn't believe in the resurrection. What in the world did they believe in? The Pharisees, on the other hand, they did believe in angels. They did believe in God's Spirit. They did believe in the resurrection. If there was a debate over Lazarus, who Jesus raised from the dead, the Pharisees would be all for it. But the Sadducees would totally reject it, say it was fake news. Didn't happen. This is interesting. Verse 2, chapter 23. The high priest Ananias. Now, we know of another Ananias. Remember the nervous guy in Damascus? And guess who walks in through the door because he can't see? He's blind. Ananias is totally jumpy. Because this is Saul the prosecutor. But now, Jesus has told Saul to go to Straight Street and meet a believer, a man called Ananias, not the high priest here, who will tell him everything that he must do. Acts 22:16, it comes to the crescendo, "Arise and be baptized to wash away your sin, calling on the name of the Lord," invoking the name of the Lord. So the high priest Ananias commanded those standing beside him to strike him on the mouth. You know, have you ever been slapped in the face? Dick looked at somebody. You know, when a man slaps another guy, it's humiliating. It wasn't a little tap. I mean, it was just like that. Who was this Ananias? Ananias, son of Nedebias, according to Josephus. Ananias ben Nebedeus, in the book of Acts, was a high priest who presided during the trial of Paul in Jerusalem and at Caesarea. Well, anyway, there are at least 10 mentions of the name Ananias. Paul will mention Ananias more as he gives his testimony. How many times? Once? No. How about 6 times? He testifies about his conversion story, how he became a Christian. If he could do it, we can do it. Tell our story. So, listen to this. Now, does Paul recognize that the guy with the big hat is Ananias the high priest? Or are they all shawled in this council room? Paul replied, "Brothers, I did not realize that he was the high priest, for it is written, 'Do not speak evil about the ruler of your people.'" What did he say about the guy who said, "Slap him"? And Paul says, you know what God's going to do to you? God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. What did Jesus say about the scribes and the Pharisees? he described them as what? Whitewashed tombs, sepulchres, filled with dead men's bones. So, why didn't he recognize the guy in the big hat? Here's a possible thing. Paul, even after he received his sight, still had something bothering him. Was it an eye problem, Bill? We know in a couple of his letters, he says, see what with large letters I write. Why write in big print? So that you can see what you're writing. Normally, Paul would have used a scribe. I, Tertius, in the book of Romans, who wrote this epistle, who wrote down what was dictated by the Apostle Paul, wrote this epistle. So he might have had an eye problem. Was it sarcasm? Or the high priest was out of uniform? He didn't have the big hat on. Exodus 22:28 says, do not blaspheme God or curse the ruler of your people. Verses 6 through 8, Sadducees versus the Pharisees. In the blue corner, the Sadducees. In the red corner, the Pharisees. Then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and the others Pharisees, called out in the Sanhedrin, my brothers, this is when he gives his pedigree. I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, and I stand on trial because of my hope in the resurrection. Hot button words. In the resurrection of the dead. Great strategy, I think. Acts 23:8. The Sadducees say that there is no resurrection and that there is neither angels nor spirits. Boy, what a dull life they must have led. You've heard me often say, because they didn't believe in that, that was why they were sad, you see. Scripture records salvation of Pharisees, but I haven't found one line that talks about a Sadducee becoming a Christian. Verse 11. And the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, you must now testify or bear witness at Rome. So you're not going to die there. You're not going to die in Jerusalem. I'm not going to allow it. We are to obey God and give witness. This is God's in charge. They tried to kill him. And so he goes to Rome. But before he goes to Rome, Paul has to cool his heels in Caesarea for 2 whole years. Paul's family showed up. Verse 16. The son of Paul's sister heard of an ambush. 40 men who had taken an oath. They wouldn't eat or drink until Paul was dead. He came and entered the barracks and told Paul about the plot. This is all we know about Paul's family. 1 Corinthians 9:5 says, do we not have a right to take along a believing wife, even as the rest of the apostles and the brothers of the Lord and Cephas, Peter? Paul's family sent him to Jerusalem to go to school. He grew up in Jerusalem. But look at what Paul writes about himself in 1 Corinthians 7 and 8. It is good to remain single as I am. So shouldn't that settle the debate on whether he was married or not? Verse 17, the son of Paul's sister. Paul will say in verse 17, lead this young man, my nephew, to the commander, for he has something to report. This is something important. There is more mention in the book of Acts about young people and being young and serving the Lord. Now, you do get mentions in the Old Testament, like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, about David being young, how he killed a lion, etc., etc. But the book of Acts has more uses of the term young and more examples for young people than any other New Testament book that we have. Take the young man to the tribune. So, I've already said that. That's a double slide. My bad. Verse 21, the 40 oath takers. So do not listen to them, for more than 40 of them are lying in wait for him, who have bound themselves under a curse, not to eat, not to drink, until they kill him, slay him. And now they are ready and waiting for the promise from you. They were devoted to the destruction of one individual. They must silence Paul. That was the same kind of people in John chapter 11 who got together, and he says, one man must die, and the man that must die is called Jesus. They were bound and determined to kill Paul. So what did the tribune do? He called to him 2 of the centurions. Get 200 soldiers ready by the 3rd hour of the night. Why the night? You can move a lot faster and quicker in the dark. And proceed to Caesarea with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen. Now, 2 centurions, a total of 400 men on foot, and a bell, and 70 men on horse to guard, Keith, one guy, one man. Paul is the burr in the saddle of the Sanhedrin, and they want to silence Paul. So, they left with a big entourage about 9 o'clock at night. As I said, 2 centurions, 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, 200 spearmen. They are carrying a letter from the tribune, Claudius Lysias, sounds like Lysol, and explains, I have found that the accusation had to do with questions about their law, Jewish law. But there was no charge against them that deserved death or imprisonment. That's verse 29. In verse 27, he writes to the governor, Felix. And by the way, what does Felix mean? Happy. The happy governor. This man was seized by the Jews, and they were about to kill him, but I came with my troops, rescued him, for I had learned that he is a Roman citizen. That's why the protection. A rest stop. And it's a rest stop 40 miles from Jerusalem, and this place called Antipatris. You see it there in the middle with the little red oval. You see Jerusalem down below, that's 40 miles to Antipatris. There is another 40 miles from Antipatris to Caesarea. Most of the men on foot returned to barracks. That's 400 guys. And they go on, perhaps with one centurion, maybe two, the 70 men on horse. And maybe Paul is on horse as well. So, they arrive with 70 horsemen, a letter, and Paul. When the cavalry arrived in Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor and handed Paul over to them. Job done. They were safely in Gentile territory. Now, let me tell you about Governor Felix. That's his bust. Those are two coins, or one coin, showing both sides. Marcus Antonius Felix was the ancient Roman procurator of Judea province from 52 to 60 AD. Felix's cruelty and licentiousness, coupled with his accessibility for a bribe. Have you ever thought about maybe the 2 years that Paul is cooling his heels, being interrogated, sitting in a prison? Was it in the hope that the brothers would come up with some dough to get him out of jail? Paul is now in Felix's jurisdiction. Look at verse 35. The governor said, "I will listen to your case as soon as the people come to bring their charges," the people from the Sanhedrin. After saying this, he gave orders for Paul to be kept as a prisoner in Herod's palace. Now, where was Herod's palace? Well, Herod had lots of palaces. Herod's praetorium, Herod's palace, served as the Roman governor's residence in Caesarea Maritima, Caesarea by the sea. Now, I want you to see this. That is an artist's reconstruction of Herod's palace by the sea. You see the floors? Can you imagine Paul standing upon marble floors like these, defending himself, testifying about Jesus? Next week, chapter 24, Paul stands before Governor Felix at Caesarea. Paul is just one step closer in making his appeal to Caesar in Rome. Here endeth the lesson. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon.
Oh, you're welcome. I hope it makes some of these events come alive.
Yeah.